I started a series of messages last week called The Church Is, and this morning we're going to continue in that series entitled, we're going to look at this idea that the church is overcoming, and we may or may not have technology that works for us. While I'm waiting for that, I just do want to remind the church to be mindful to, amongst all the other things that you got on your heart, to remember to pray for your firefighters. It is going to be a particularly nasty season. Those fires yesterday are 4 to 6 weeks faster than we should normally expect that kind of thing to happen in the season. And I was called out to something that wasn't quite as severe as the other things happening down south, but it's a lot of heat and a lot of dry. It hasn't rained in, I think, a month. It's bone dry out there. A couple weeks ago, we were at a fire, and I was literally within a couple of meters of a tree falling on me. And you just don't know these things are going to happen. They just happen. So you just remember to pray for your firefighters, wherever they might be, occasionally, especially when you see the reports of a bad fire day, like it was yesterday, because that was nasty, what happened yesterday. And it's just a foretaste of what's going to come in the next 3 months. Okay, so we're doing this message series on the church is overcoming. And last week I looked at the idea that the church is saints alive. And this morning we're going to look at this idea that the church is overcoming. And the place that I want to do that from is from the book of Revelation. And I want to start in the book of Revelation in chapter 1. Now, one of the things, I read this just recently, there's nothing, if you come to the book of the Revelation, it is full of quite frightening and scary images. But I read this just recently. The thing that's scarier than those images is the number of translations, interpretations, and books that have been written about the book of Revelation, because depending on your perspective, you are going to come across thousands upon thousands of different ways of looking at the book. I have a shelf and a half worth of books on the book of the Revelation. I have no other topic that consumes that much shelf space except for the shelf space that's set aside for abuse. But other than that, then there's the book of the Revelation and then everything else. And it's just an indication of the amount of material that is written about the book of the Revelation. Now, theologians have this word that they use called hermeneutic, and it's a word that basically means the filter through which you decide what the text means. It's the way that you approach the text, that your hermeneutic. And one of the filters or grids that theologians use is to approach the word of the book of the Revelation as if it's an entirely futuristic text. And having decided that that's what it's about, then you approach the book of Revelation and you try to eke out the details of what it's saying about the future. And so it's the perspective that the book of the Revelation is like the newspaper of the future written in cartoons, and you're just trying to discern what's happening today in light of what God predicted about the future. That's one perspective. Other perspectives is that it's just a general picture about the church in any day, and so it speaks to our church and every church in a season, and that's the hermeneutic in which you approach it. This morning I want to approach it through a different lens, and the lens I want to use, or the grid I want to use, comes from the text itself, and that is in Revelation chapter 1, verse 3, which is a very helpful hermeneutic for deciding how to approach the text. And this is the words of John, through Jesus to John, writing, "Blessed is the one who reads aloud the words of this prophecy, and blessed are those who hear and who keep what is written in it, for the time is near." Now, there's a few things that I want to emphasize there, and one of the things is you probably never get this, but do you notice that it's the only book of the Bible in which you're blessed to read it? That's one of the things. It's the only book of the Bible that promises you this. But it's also notice that it's blessed is the one who reads aloud. Now, what's interesting to note about this is that you and I are modern day people with the text in our hands, with the Greek behind it, and we can take the book of Revelation and dissect it to its merest molecules and inspect every molecule and glean the detail out of the text. But that was never the way that the original receivers of this text approached it, because most of them couldn't read. Most of them didn't have it in their own hands. A copy of the letter would have gone to a church and it would have been read aloud. And so how they would have approached the text is to hear the message being spoken by the person reading the thing, probably in one sitting. If I stood here and read the book of the Revelation to you, I could probably do it, depending how fast I read, within 2 hours. And so I could stand there and read you this letter, and you would get an impression of what's going on here. And so the big idea that the early churches would have got would not have been the detail of what exactly does this image mean, and what exactly does this mean, and what exactly does that mean, which is the way we approach it. But what they would have got was the big idea that Babylon is Rome, and it's an evil empire, and Jesus is coming again, and he's going to overthrow the rulers of this wicked age, and Christ ultimately wins, and there will be a new age to come. And that's kind of the big picture. And if you just approach the book of the Revelation that way, it's actually quite an encouraging text. But we kind of come to it with a bit of fear because of the detail, and it is so confusing. And yet that's not the way the original readers would have approached it. They would have heard it rather than read it. And they would not have heard it a lot. It would have been read once or twice, but they wouldn't have poured over it like we do today. Secondly, to notice is that this is a prophecy. So it is definitely telling us something about the future. It is foretelling the future. But the means by which this is doing this is also seen in the way it says to keep what is written in it. How do you keep the 7 bowls? How do you keep the 7 trumpets? And so the way the word prophecy is being used there is both foretelling, something's going to happen, and forthtelling, how to live in this present age. And so you will see that with the Old Testament prophets. Often they didn't foretell the future. Often they just proclaimed the word of the Lord to the people today. Do this, repent now, live like this. And so the way that you can approach the book of the Revelation, and the hermeneutic that I'm going to use, is to approach it with a thread that runs through the text, and that it's a text about how to be faithful disciples in the midst of an evil empire. Because that's the big idea that's going on here. John's writing to churches who are being persecuted in a Roman Empire by an evil empire. How do we maintain our faith in the midst of this wickedness? And that's a theme. That's where this idea of keeping what is written in it comes through. And so often you will come across the text and you can ask the question, what is it asking me to, how is it asking me to obey? What is it asking from me? How should I then live in the midst of an evil age? I'm going to read you a quote from Scott McKnight, who's a theologian and author. He just released a book in the last year called Revelation for the Rest of Us. And he says this: too many interpretations of Revelation miss its message of discipleship because those interpretations are obsessed with who, where, and what. And that's what I'm saying. We try to break it down to its merest molecules and try to understand what's going on in there. He continues, the book of Revelation is for modern day disciples who have eyes to see the power of the empire in our world and in our churches and in our lives. The book of Revelation, when read well, forms us into dissident disciples. And a dissident person is someone who refuses to obey authoritarian government. That's what he means by this. People who are dissident disciples who discerned corruptions of the world and church. Conformity to the world is the problem. Discipleship requires dissidence when one lives in Babylon. Maybe an easier way of saying that. The world is singing a song. We as saints are called to sing a different one. So we are always going to be in a different key, singing different words to a different song. And so we should always sound different. In the midst of an empire that seeks to crush and destroy us, we are called to sing different songs. And so using that idea that the book of the Revelation is about discipleship, it's amongst other things, but it's about discipleship and being faithful disciples in the midst of an evil empire. How can we then approach this text when we understand that we are to be a church that is called to overcome? Now, this is a picture of Nike, and Nike, you're famous because of your tennis shoes, but she was the Greek goddess of victory. And she would be associated closely with Athena, and Athena was the goddess of war. And Zeus, who was the king of the gods. So the three of them usually sat at the top of the pantheon of gods. And the reason I'm mentioning Nike is because Nike would be the one that you would pray to if you're going to war, you would want victory. Nike's the one you would pray to if you were in a sporting contest and you wanted victory. Nike is the goddess of victory and of overcoming and of conquest, and you want her on your side. And the reason I'm mentioning her, and by the way, the Roman comparative is Victoria, is the goddess Victoria, which we get the name Victory. So this is where these ideas come from. Well, the reason I'm mentioning Nike is because throughout the letter of Book of Revelation, John uses a form of the word Nike when he speaks to the church to be overcomers, or to be victorious, or to conquer. We are called to be these kinds of people who are conquering people, and he uses a form of the word Nike to let us know that that's what he wants us to be. So the question I want to ask is, what does it mean to overcome? What does that actually mean? Now, when you read through the book of the Revelation, there are 7 letters to 7 churches at the beginning, and they follow a formula. There's a commendation. I commend you for being these kinds of people. And then there's a condemnation, but you're missing out in some way. So you can see the discipleship section of this text going that way. And then there is this promise. If you overcome, you receive a reward. And we should get that picture now from sporting contests. So basically what John is saying in his letters to the church is, if you overcome, if you're victorious, if you conquer and win, then what is the prize for winning? And that's a common pattern, the formula that John uses in these letters. And so I know it's a lot of text up there, and I'm just highlighting the letters that are in bold are the letters to the churches. And John says, to those who overcome, and there are all these things that he lists here that are available to the people who overcome. If you overcome, you get to eat of the tree of life. That should remind you of both Genesis and what you see at the end of the book. You are not hurt by the second death. The second death, and I mentioned it last week, is hell and Hades thrown into the lake of fire. This is the second death. You avoid this. If you are an overcomer, you receive hidden manna and a white stone with a name on it. Hidden manna is probably got to do with the manna that was in the Ark of the Covenant that has now gone hidden, and they don't know where it is. And the white stone probably means an invitation to a feast, given the manna idea, which is the food of God, and a feast, an invitation to a feast. But some of the detail of this is lost to antiquity, but the church of Pergamum would have known exactly what he meant. And then you have authority over nations. You're given the morning star. The morning star is a metaphor for Jesus. You get to be in the presence of the shining light of Jesus. You're clothed in white garments, and we get that imagery all the time. Our name is written in the book of the life, and we get this imagery. We know we want our names to be written in the book of the life. At the final judgment, you want your name there. You will be a pillar in the temple of God. You will receive the name of God written on you. The name of the city is written on you. The name of Jesus is written on you. It's indication of possession. And lastly, you will get to sit with Christ on his throne. And this is the reward for those who overcome, for those who are victorious, for those who conquer. This is the reward. And it's all metaphor language for you're saved. You are justified by faith, and you are now saved. And so for those who overcome, the reward is salvation. So this is what John is writing in the letter. Christian church is people who overcome. The Christian church are people who are saved. The Christian church are saints alive. That's what I said last week. And this is his emphasis here. But then it does cause us to ask a second question. What does it mean or who are we overcoming, or what is it that we are overcoming? And that's a valid question to ask. And to answer that question, I want to jump right into the middle of the text to Revelation and chapter 12. Now, in Revelation in chapter 12, you have this pause in the text. You've had the 7 seals, you've had the 7 trumpets, you've had the 2 witnesses, you had all this turmoil going on, and it's all this imagery that's insane and crazy. And then suddenly in in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 1, we read this. A great portent appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and on her head was a crown of 12 stars. Now what is happening at this point in the text is that what John is doing is getting you to refer as a flashback. How did we get to this point in the story? It's a device that's used often in literature and movies. You might see some kind of movie where the beginning of the movie starts and a guy's running down the street or running down a road, and he jumps off a cliff and he pulls a parachute and people are shooting at him, and it fades away, and then it says 3 weeks earlier. And the guy's walking down the street drinking a beer with his buddies, right? And so the movie starts in the middle, and then they flash back to how you got there, and then it gets back to and this is what John is doing here. He started from the middle of the story effectively, and now he's flashing back. How did we get to this point in the story? And he sees this great sign, which is telling you that this is a pointer to something. It's not a real thing. He didn't see it. There isn't a real woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet. These are images that are pointing to real things. There's an artist's rendition of it there. This woman was pregnant and was crying out in birth pains in the agony of giving birth. Then another portent appeared in heaven, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 diadems on his head. His tail swept down a third of the stars of heaven and threw them to the earth. Then the dragon stood before the woman who was about to bear a child, so he might devour her child as soon as it was born. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. But her child was snatched away and taken to God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has a place prepared by God. Now, the picture that's being told here, this woman and the stars and the moon and the sun, is reminding us of what's happened in Genesis 37:9. And there Joseph has a dream of 11 stars bowing down to him and the sun and the moon bowing down to him. This image of sun, moon, and stars like this by John in the book of the Revelation, he's speaking about the nation of Israel. And so what he's saying here is that how we got to this point in the story of all this turmoil that's happening up to this point in the book of the Revelation is that the nation of Israel gave birth to a son who rules the world with a rod of iron. Now, that's the imagery here. So the picture of the woman is Israel, and the child that is born and rules with a rod of iron, well, this is clearly Jesus. And then this dragon with the 7 heads and 10 crowns, and in red is violence and power and authority on the earth. That's the image. And when you see in chapter 12, verse 9, it lets us know that this serpent is the devil and he's the deceiver of the age. This is a picture of Satan. And so what you have here in this image is the Christmas story. The curtain is dragged back. There's no elves, there's no snowmen, there's no Frosty, the Santa Claus. What's really going on at Christmas is that the nation of Israel, through great turmoil and trouble and strife and tribulation through her history, gives birth to the Messiah. And you know the story of Herod the Great, who sought to destroy the child and failed. This is the image that's being painted here by John. So the question to ask here then is, what is it the church is overcoming? And the answer is given here in Genesis in chapter 12. We're overcoming Satan. And what you see also in verse 9, Satan, who is the deceiver of the whole world. What the church is overcoming is Satan and his power and his lies. That is what the church is overcoming. This image here of the dragon is an image of Satan, but the actual reality of the person who was actually doing the work of Satan in that day was a human being named Herod the Great. And so this is what you're seeing here, is that there is this spiritual warfare going on behind the scenes. And so what the church is overcoming is the spiritual warfare that happens behind the scenes, often unseen. The powers and the principalities of the air, Satan and his lies and deceptions. It's the spiritual power behind Herod, or Hitler, or Pol Pot, or Putin, or ISIS, or Hamas, that shows up through politics and philosophies and religions and educational systems. Satan has a God-allowed rule on earth, the unseen hand that moves the unsaved, unredeemed mankind. Satan is like a dog on a chain, but there's some length to the chain, but he's chained. But you read about that in the book of Job. Satan was given an opportunity through circumstances to attack Job, but he needed permission. Satan is limited by the purposes and plans of God. He is a proud being, always being humbled. His greatest asset is our own ignorance of him. And Satan is never happier when people refuse to believe he exists. There is a prophecy in Isaiah in chapter 14 of the king of Tyre, who again, it's just the prophecy of a king, a well-known king, but what the prophecy is telling us is that the spiritual energy behind the king of Tyre is Satan himself. And you might be familiar with this text in Isaiah chapter 14. How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground, who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven. I will raise my throne above the stars of God. I will sit on the mount of assembly on the heights of Zaphon. I will ascend to the tops of the clouds and make myself the most high. But you are brought down to the place of the dead, to the depths of the pit. Now this prophecy is a prophecy about the king of Tyre, but it's really ultimately highlighting a spiritual energy behind him who is Satan himself. Jonathan Edwards, who you may know as a great theologian from the 1700s in America, said this about Satan: "But when it was revealed to him, high and glorious as he was, that he must be a ministering spirit to the race of mankind, which he had seen newly created, which appeared so feeble, mean, and despicable, so vastly inferior not only to him, the prince of angels and head of the created universe, but also to the inferior angels, that he must be subject to one of the race that should hereafter be born, and he could not bear it. This occasioned his fall." It was pride. And what Jonathan Edwards is saying is Satan looks at mankind who seems so stupid and weak and feeble and cannot believe that God would favor them over him. Satan and his fallen angels are motivated by a loathing of God and those who are the apple of his eye, which are the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve. And the primary means by which he leads people astray is seen in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 9, by deception. Deception, which ultimately leads to all kinds of evil. Jesus in John chapter 8 and verse 44 calls Satan a liar and the father of lies. Satan doesn't care what you believe as long as it's true. And that's his perspective of the world. And the means by which he ultimately seeks to control the world is through deception. He actively seeks to do it. There is a right path that people should walk on. There is a divine ought. People ought to walk along the path of righteousness and justice and shalom, a way that leads to God, the narrow way. People should do this kind of thing. Satan knows it. And so as long as he's got you walking on any other path, he's happy. Overcoming people are those who overcome the power of Satan in this world, particularly his lies and deceptions. Now it's interesting when Jesus said when he said about Satan being a liar and the father of lies, who was he speaking to? He was speaking to religious people, which tells me that just because you're a religious person doesn't mean you are free of believing lies. It's about false philosophies, false ideas, false religions, false politics. Charles Taze Russell, who was the founder of the Jehovah's Witnesses, believed a lie. Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormons, believed a lie. Jim Jones, who caused all those people to kill themselves in Jonestown in Guyana, believed a lie. Karl Marx, Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, Pol Pot, and any other numbers who subtly and not so subtly have accepted the lies of Satan, spread the lies, and the evidence of it is a loss of shalom, destruction, turmoil, and death. I might suggest that wherever you see the loss of shalom, you can be certain that somebody has believed a lie. If you see the loss of shalom in your family, somebody probably somewhere has believed a lie. If you see a loss of shalom in your country, in your neighborhoods, in your world, in your workplace, wherever you find that there is turmoil and destruction and conflict, somebody somewhere has believed a lie. The means by which Satan does this, however, is interesting to me because Satan is a created being. He's not everywhere in all places at all times. He cannot be. He's limited in space-time. Satan has some demons, but he's outnumbered 2-1. You read in that section of Revelation chapter 12 that he used his tail to bring down a third of the stars, meaning angels. So he's got a third of the heavenly host came with him, so he's outnumbered 2-1. There are demons down here who can do his work, but they're limited in number, and there are not any increase in number of demons, and there is an increase in the number of people. So the number of demons to people ratio is increasingly all the time. There's less and less demons per person than there used to be. And so the question is then, how is it possible that Satan is able to influence people? Because he's not sitting on your shoulder whispering lies to you, probably. And his demons are not sitting in this room whispering lies to us, probably. That's not to say that they might not or could not. So the primary means he's going to do this is by whispering lies into the ears of those who can influence the rest of us. So he can whisper a lie into someone like Adolf Hitler and a few other of his leading henchmen, and that's sufficient to convince a whole range of other people to believe a lie. The picture is kind of like this. Satan infects the mind and thoughts and ideas and philosophies and religions and thinking of one who spreads the lies to others who are prepared to believe it for whatever reason that they're prepared to believe the lie, because there's something ultimately, it's seemingly in it for them. Paul in 2 Corinthians in chapter 10 is speaking about the kind of battle that we are facing, and it is a battle of ideas and philosophies and religions and thoughts. He says Paul in 2 Corinthians 10, verse 3, "Indeed, we live as human beings, but we do not wage war according to human standards." We are not fighting a physical war. We're not using bombs and missiles and drones and bullets. We wage war not according to human standards, for the weapons of our warfare are not merely human, but they have divine power to destroy strongholds. We have some weapons at our disposal. We destroy arguments and every proud obstacle raised up against the knowledge of God, and we take every thought captive to obey Christ. Now, normally the way we approach that passage is a very self-centered way of approaching that passage, and think that Paul is telling us that we have to maintain our thought life, our own personal thought life. This is about how I control my own personal thoughts, and there's merit in that. But what Paul is primarily saying here is that as an apostle, as a missionary to the world, walking into a world of pagan ideas and pagan religion and pagan thoughts and pagan ideas, my means of fighting these things is not through the weapons of warfare, but is to proclaim the truth of the gospel. This is the weapon we use. We speak truth. And the thoughts that he takes captive are not necessarily his thoughts, but the thoughts of the ideas and the philosophies and the religions of men. I take all those ideas captive, and I knock those ideas down, and instead I erect a stronghold, and that stronghold is the gospel of Jesus Christ. This is the weapon of the church. What Paul is doing is destroying arguments that seek to destroy the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ and the lies and the deceptions of Satan that have infiltrated the thoughts of mankind across the world over the course of human history. The church overcomes when it speaks forth the truth of the gospel and lives lives of faithfulness to Christ, lives of gospel faithfulness. And hence, this is why this is a book of discipleship. This is the point that he's making here. And so, if the thing for the overcomer is salvation, and the thing we're overcoming is the power of Satan and the lies and deceptions that lead to destruction, how do we do this? And we find this out in Revelation chapter 12 and verse 11. We conquer him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of our testimony. Now, this idea that we conquer by the blood of the Lamb, we get this, right? This is tattooed into our brains. Revelation chapter 7:14 even gives you a good interpretation of what does it mean to be dressed in a white cloth. Who are these people dressed in white? And they are the ones who have washed the robes and made them white in the blood of the Lamb. White robes is an indication of righteousness. White robes is an indication of salvation. It's a strange way of cleaning your clothes. Blood, use blood anyplace else and it stains. But this blood has powers to make us whiter than the snow. And if you've never seen snow, think of the whitest thing you can think of. And Jesus' blood makes you purer than that. We overcome because we are Christians. Christians overcome. And by the word of our testimony. We overcome by our faith demonstrated by not only our words, but by our actions. And again, hence why I'm hammering home this idea that this is a book about discipleship. The church is called to be faithful disciples of Jesus Christ in the midst of a world of an empire like Babylon or Rome or the United States or Australia or whoever the empire seeks to impose its will on us as people. I can tell you about my faith, but I will show you my faith by my works. This is the words of James. We are saved by faith through grace, and I can demonstrate it to you by my works of faithfulness. My works of faithfulness don't save me. My works of faithfulness are evidence that I am an overcomer. So let me look at three brief applications of this text. Firstly, the goal of the Christian life is not to achieve a problem-free existence, but rather to persevere and live faithfully in the journey of this life that will include many spiritual battles. It is a mistake to think that I'll come to Jesus and all my problems will melt away as I enter into the blessing of God's people. Some problems may go away, but you'll just end up with a new set of problems. Satan is the opposer and accuser of God's people. And even if he can't make you lose your salvation, he can, if you allow him to get your eyes so fixed on the troubles of this life, he can make you such a miserable Christian that your life is no advertisement for the gospel. And this is a temptation I fall into all the time. God doesn't love you. God doesn't care. You aren't really saved. You'll never get better. Wherever there is a loss of shalom in your life, it is worth asking, what lies am I believing that are causing me to act in ways that steal shalom? And maybe there's none. Maybe there are lies being believed by people in your life that are causing you to lose shalom because they're taking it from you. But perhaps not. But it's certainly worth a question worth asking. Secondly, this passage of Scripture is highlighting that overcomers are those, as I've been saying from verse 1-3 in Revelation, who take the reality of our spiritual battle to heart and are living lives of faithful obedience in it. Just so you are aware that we are in a battle, John emphasizes this in Revelation 12, verse 17. The dragon was angry with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her children who keep the commandments of God and hold the testimony of Jesus. We are in a spiritual battle, but we will overcome by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. Knowing and obeying God's words are the primary weapon to deal with the lies and deceit of the devil and his attempt to throw the Christian off course. And lastly, we can trust God to protect us against the attacks of our enemy. We will overcome. Satan, although powerful, cannot thwart God's plan for salvation for you. God's plan will succeed. Notice who wins this battle in heaven. In chapter 12, there is a battle between Michael the archangel and Satan. God is not fighting him. Jesus is not fighting him. Because for Jesus or God to fight the devil would be beneath them. Satan is just but a created being, and he's not even the most powerful created being. Oh, sure, we must respect his ability to deceive us, but he is a defeated foe. He's a humiliated foe. Satan is beneath, ultimately, us. Defeat may seem like it's coming at any moment, but victory is now and to come for those who believe. But the victory ultimately is not the destruction of the wicked. It's the vindication of the church and of Jesus. want to finish by reading you a poem, which you know better as a song, and you'll recognize it the minute I start reading it, but I think it makes a better poem than a song. I've never liked it as a song, though I've liked it as its words. A mighty fortress is our God, a bulwark never failing. Our helper he, amid the flood of mortal ills prevailing. For still our ancient foe does seek to work us woe. His craft and power are great, and armed with cruel hate, on earth is not his equal. Did we in our own strength confide, our striving would be losing. Were not the right man on our side, the man of God's own choosing. You ask who that might be. Christ Jesus, it is he. Lord Sabbath his name, from age to age the same, and he must win the battle. And though this world with devils filled should threaten to undo us, we will not fear, for God has willed his truth to triumph through us. The prince of darkness grim, we tremble not for him. His rage we can endure, for lo, his doom is sure. One little word can fell him. That word above all earthly powers, no thanks to them abides. The Spirit and the gift are ours, through him who with us sides. Let goods and kindred go, this mortal life also. The body they may kill, God's truth abides still. His kingdom is forever. Amen.